Hello, and welcome to my presentation today surrounding our digital supply chain. I work at Mayo Clinic, and we'll get into introductions next. There we go. A little bit about myself. As I said earlier, I work at the Mayo Clinic. I've been here for about 15 years. I've got experience in other industries as well. I'm currently a vice chair in our supply chain. I manage all of our strategy and our strategic initiatives that link to that strategy. A little bit about disclosures. I don't feel like I have anything relevant to today's discussion, although you'll see there are various technology and business claims that I have, as well as some of the industry advisories that I serve on. I do want to stress that the contents of this presentation reflect my own opinions and thoughts and shouldn't be considered Mayo Clinic's policy or position on these various topics. So I also want to thank you for having me here today. It's always humbling to be among colleagues such as my fellow presenters, as well as yourself in the audience. Hopefully I can contribute, give you some ideas and some things that you can take forward, whether you work in the supply chain or not. More specifically, I intend to address three important questions. First of all is, what does it mean to innovate? What is digital and why is it important? How is it related to innovation? And last but not least, but how is Mayo Clinic, particularly in our supply chain, leveraging innovation and digital as far as our future is concerned? So let's start right off with that first question. What does it mean to innovate? Terms like innovation often get overused and often misused. So I'll start with a good definition. This is a real simple one, and that innovation can be defined simply as a new idea, new device, or a new method. I like this because it's simple. It's the something new, however, of the definition that I find the most interesting and perhaps something that I don't necessarily agree with, because often innovation is new to those that are experiencing it, but it might not really be new. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And it's reinforced by one of my favorite books, which is called The Medici Effect, and it was written by Franz Johansson. And the name of the book was derived from the Medici dynasty, which was an Italian banking family that came together in the 14th century. As a matter of fact, they invented double entry bookkeeping, which may not be the most interesting or exciting innovation that we have when we think of innovation. But what's more important is what the Medici did with the wealth that they accumulated. They started to really converge things like art and science and literature and architecture in their various investments with their wealth. And that spawned something that we refer today as the Great Renaissance. And this was a period of unparalleled innovation. One of the main theories of the book is that innovation occurs when diverse ideas interest, and that's what I'll carry on to my next slide. Johansson explains why diversity is so important. He points out, to the point that I made earlier, is that very little is actually invented, but instead that innovation is through the recombining of proven solutions in new ways. The Apple iPhone is a great example of this. You know, who would have ever imagined spending $600, $700, or even $1,000 for a phone that you would carry with you? Why? Because it's not just a phone. Today's iPhone is an intersection of many products. It's a camera, an organizer, an iPod, a video camera, a PC, and of course it is a phone. You can make phone calls on it. I would argue that none of these are necessarily new products, but when they're intersected on a single platform, they certainly are innovative, and it's something that we'll pay for. In fact, Johansson questions whether the most important trait for an innovator is actually even creativity, which we'll get to on our next slide. Following this last slide, let's take a look. These are some of my favorite quotes in the book. For example, innovators are often self-taught, and the diversity in teams allows different viewpoints, approaches, and frames of mind. And if we only seek intersection when things are going poorly, we hurt our overall chances of success. These are kind of some of the main themes of the book, and also some of the things that I carry forward when I think of innovation. Let's really focus in on this first idea of innovators are often self-taught. I think many of us have seen that. Most innovators are not the most skilled, but instead they're the most convinced that things could be better. We see this time and time again within our organizations. Those that often innovate are new to our teams or come from outside of an industry altogether with new ideas and proven solutions that work there and that could be reapplied in our situation. The other important part here is that if things are going well, we tend to stay in a field. You know, it's human nature to seek safety and fear failure. In fact, many individuals are so fearful to rock the boat that they never do so. This is also why certain organizations innovate more than others. It really depends on your corporate culture. I guess my dominating thought is that the first and foremost, that innovation is not as much about creativity as it is curiosity and courage. Once again, curiosity and courage. If you accept these conclusions, it can be quite liberating because often many of us think of ourselves as not very creative, but we all are curious, and I think we all can be inspired to have courage to do something different and something new. So if you're in business, along with innovation, I think you really need to understand and appreciate what's going on with digital. And the main reason is that I think of digital as a kind of rocket fuel for innovation. It makes innovation easy. I'll explain why in a second. So this leads us to our next question of what is digital and why is it important? This, I think, is not an overhyped up term. There is a lot of confusion as it applies to digital, but I really believe that this is different. And I'll explain why I think it's different in the upcoming slides. First, like we did for innovation, let's start on a single definition. And now that's a little more difficult for digital because it's a lot of things to a lot of people. It is an entirely new way of doing business, and it is about technology. And it is about a new way of engaging customers and as a matter of fact, suppliers as well, particularly when we think about the supply chain. So it's all these things. But I think there's something larger underneath these things that makes it kind of special. I have to give credit. I don't know who the presenter was, but this particular presenter kind of gave their presentation as to what they thought digital was. And they described it as a fourth industrial revolution. And it really made sense to me and put context to those prior three bullets and matter of fact and more. You see, in the 1700s, we had our first industrial revolution, and that was really centered around the invention of the mechanical machine. Now, this was introduced in the 1700s, but right behind that came a second industrial revolution, and what it sought to do was to really optimize that mechanical machine, and it was all around the assembly line. So this also created the factory. It created specialization, and it created great scale that we've never had before, and really completely revolutionized business at the time. We went quite a bit of time, all the way to right just before 1970, for the next industrial revolution, and it really centered around the introduction of the computer. And what the computer did is it allowed us to automate that assembly line. Now, the interesting thing is, and here we are today, we never really had that next revolution until now. We call that the fourth industrial revolution, or some are referring to this as Industry 4.0. And what it does is it optimizes business with the use of the computer. You see, the computer wasn't necessarily designed and developed to automate an assembly line. As a matter of fact, it doesn't like assembly lines. It likes real-time interactions and to operate more in a network. In digital terms, we call that a platform, and I'm going to talk about that in a few moments. So today we have implemented in many of our automated systems, mainly our enterprise resource planning, or ERP. It's a pipeline process. It's a very siloed function, very structured. You hear best practices. As a matter of fact, you can't stray from best practices within these systems because they're relatively rigid by design. And so they move batches of information through an assembly line and then towards an end goal as a batch. Well, platforms work substantially different. They work more in a real-time, automated fashion where they're directly connecting a transaction at a time to stakeholders that need something immediately. So if you think about this and you think about some of the digital businesses like transportation, and you think about if Lyft operated as a pipeline, what it might look like, many of us would still be waiting for our first ride along with everybody else. It's this platform concept that makes it work, and makes it work really well. So this next question, I think we'll start to understand a little bit more about this platform concept, as well as how we intersect technologies to create that platform. And it brings us to our next question, which is, what is Mayo's supply chain plan to leveraging digital? So before we get into what the supply chain needs to look like in healthcare, you got to first kind of get your head around where is healthcare going. And it too is moving down a digital platform-oriented place, very much like what we've experienced in retail. I don't think it will be a matter of where you get certain things done in the healthcare facilities, whether it's in a hospital, in a skilled nursing home, in a center, in your home. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be for the consumer to decide where they want service, just like you are as a consumer. You decide whether you want to shop online or whether you want to go to a brick and mortar or some combination of the both. You decide how do you do that, but you do expect the same type of experience. We call that omni-channel. I think that's very much where healthcare is heading. And if you think about that from a supply chain perspective, it's pretty scary, because what it means is that we're going to have to always be available to the provider and to the healthcare consumer, no matter where they're at and no matter when they ask for our service, which is radically different than how we think of delivering supply chain services in healthcare today. So if you look at our vision of our supply chain, we want to completely reimagine our supply chain as a platform, primarily so that we're always available, we're always on, and we're incredibly easy to use. As a matter of fact, I like to describe the supply chain as invisible. When it's working, you don't even notice it's there. You just have what you need when you need it, and you don't even need to ask. And that's what we think, that's how we think of supply chain in healthcare, and that's how we'd like to think of it in the same digital environment as well. Well, that's a real challenge. This is what our current systems infrastructure looks like today. It's a pipeline all centered around an ERP. And you can see real quickly where the bottleneck is. It's right in the center of the chart, where it is that ERP. It's batch-oriented. It's not 24/7. As a matter of fact, it doesn't support 24/7 real well. It worked real well for the past 20 years, and this was state-of-the-art for the past 20 years, but it's just not going to cut it as we move to this new platform of healthcare. So in its place, when you go to talk to digital organizations like Lyft or Uber, they'll kind of look at you real funny when you ask them what ERP they use. They center their entire infrastructure around data and analytics as opposed to a process. And that's what we intend to do with our supply chain. It'll all be based off of what we're calling an information management platform, so even beyond analytics. It's made up of 4 key components: process automation, process integration, analytics, and data management. None of these concepts are brand new or have recently been invented, but it's the putting them together which is really different. It's that intersecting, like that iPhone example I gave you earlier, that really makes this work. So just real briefly, data management includes knowledge management, so both storing structured and unstructured knowledge as it applies to all the products that flow through our supply chain. Master data management, and of course data quality. Analytics consists of our big data stack, including our data lakes, and high-speed access to those data lakes. And what we're looking to do here this is really a self-service environment. As a matter of fact, this whole information management platform is a self-service environment for the operator, not for IT, to be able to meet the needs of our healthcare consumers and providers. One of the interesting things about analytics is we're eliminating the most expensive part, which is the data warehouse. We'll go straight from raw data to insights. We'll feed those insights into processes through something called process automation and process integration. Process automation, for those that are familiar with RPA, would totally get this, but it's a tool that allows us to basically create robots. Anything that we do manually and interacting with the system today, we can basically create a robot to do that. And then we can encapsulate that, and we can create an interface to that called an API, which is the last part, which is process integration. Now, what's really cool is when we meld all these together. So when I have a process that it needs to have some knowledge, say some knowledge about a product, it could use our data management platform. It can get those analytics and those insights, and it itself, with some rules, can make some decisions as opposed to a human doing so. So it's when you put all these things together, it gets very exciting. And it's also through automation where we can be always accessible and 24/7, extremely fast. Like I said, it's when you put these 4 things back together, it's these intersecting on a platform that I spoke earlier about innovation, is what makes this really different. Let me give you a really basic example. Today, through that batch process, we submit orders to our suppliers. They check if they have inventory. If they have inventory, they fulfill the order. If not, they send us what's called a back order. We get about 3,000 of these back orders today, a day, which is just crazy. So in the future, what we'll do or could do is a transaction at a time. So when we get that request, we'll place we'll check to see if they have inventory available. If they do, we'll buy it from them. If they don't, we'll buy it from somebody else. So instead of getting a back order and something that we have to deal with as an exception in our supply chain, like I said, 3,000 of these things a day, instead, we won't get any back orders, and instead, that manufacturer will get a lost sale. Now that's a dynamic that will change how our supply chain operates and what service looks like in our supply chain overnight. And that's just one really small example. Really feel that, like I said before, all this technology, our ERP users of the future aren't going to be sitting on screens, manually doing work. Instead, their use of the system will be programming it. And we won't rely on IT staff to program it. We'll rely on them for the security, for the infrastructure, things like that. But the operator within the supply chain will be programming these business processes as opposed to actually sitting tethered to a screen and approving transactions. So really exciting stuff. It's going to be a lot different. It's also what gives us that lights out ability and the ability to serve anywhere, anytime, and to be really easy to use. So what's the point? I think I probably already made the point in several cases, but I think this one's an important one. So Gartner recently did a study, and they estimate that 38.5% of the cost of healthcare is in our supply chain. So that's close to 40% of healthcare is a supply chain problem. So the fact of the matter is, if we don't change supply chain, we're not going to be able to change healthcare. So it's critically important that we change our supply chain. Well, the second point is that this totally changes the game as to who a supplier might be. We think about digital industries that have transformed, such as transportation with Lyft and Uber, and we think about the capacity that's now available to you and I on their platform. And if we apply this broader to our healthcare supply chain, it gets really exciting because you don't have to be a massive supplier in order to participate. So we're really getting to where, these top tier suppliers, it may not be your size, it may be your ability to innovate and to serve through this digital platform that really makes you a leader. And so we're really thinking instead of kind of this top-down approach, kind of this waterfall approach, it's really an ecosystem, very much like what you see in Uber and Lyft in the transportation industry. So big impact. Really feel that this is going to enable competition, and with competition comes more innovation, more solutions, and as a healthcare consumer, better products and services to meet the needs. So what can you do? What I would advise is get started. I'm encouraging everybody to simply get started. Start small if you have to, but go ahead and get started. As a matter of fact, I don't like the saying about the tortoise and the hare and that it's a marathon and not a sprint or a race. I think of today's world as a bunch of races or a bunch of sprints. And so act fast, learn fast, fail fast, and continue to innovate. So I would encourage you to do the same. And the hard reality is don't let corporate culture get in your way. There are always those that are ready to jump on the bus, or even are already on the bus. Embrace them, bring them along for the ride. There are also those that just need a little bit of encouragement to get on the bus, and I'd encourage you to bring them along the best you can. The one thing I would say is that there's always those that want to stand in the bus and hold it up for everybody else. If you're one of those, don't be like this guy that's splattered on the front of the bus, because this bus is moving, and it's moving really, really fast. My last points here is that I hope that you found this material was interesting and helpful. I don't think you have to be in supply chain in order to apply these concepts. I think innovation and digital are applicable to just about any business function. I also hope that you have the courage and you can bring the ideas to innovate. You don't have to be creative. If you are creative, that's great, but anybody can innovate. And then last but not least, I hope you join me in kind of this fourth industrial revolution, which is Industry 4.0. It's really an exciting time for all of us. Thank you.